Okay, friends, thank you all again for being here. I hope you know that throughout this time, if you want to go get more soup or more drink, get up and go. Don't need to worry about anything such as that. I haven't put it out yet, but if you are a really avid coffee drinker such as myself, we have a pot of coffee in the kitchen because you need that at 6:30 at night. Today's class, basically, I will probably be speaking the majority of the time just to give a background, but I'm hoping that this won't be the norm. Some people have not read the book at all, some people have already read through the book, some have read just the introduction, but today's class is primarily to give you a background on Henri Nouwen, or Henri, if you will. I'm going to be calling him Henri throughout this class. And also trying to expose you to what he sounded like, what he looked like, and a different view of what he was like when he wasn't wearing a collar versus what he was like when he was in his vestments and doing his thing. And part of it is to try to give you a full glimpse of, we normally, when we show ourselves, people will see certain sides, but very rarely, like we do with God in prayer, do we show our true selves to everybody all the time in all places. I want to show some of his influences and give you a taste of his thoughts that might help make sense of where he's going in the book. And I will say, for those who have read through chapter 1 already, it is a little heavy-handed at the beginning. And you don't have to agree with him, but his goal is to try to understand the mindset of what's going on in his mind when he wrote this book in the 1970s. If many of you can remember, my parents always talked to me about this, about having to hide under the desks in the 1960s, or the 60s for them as well. Not in New Hampshire, okay. But during that time, there was a threat that they didn't understand, and that itself, from a national to a world stage, can cause anxiety to the individual soul. So we're going to be able to see how he, from a psychological standpoint, takes a look at people that are suffering and trying to remind them that in their suffering there is joy. And for those who just simply want to live in a world of joy, it must also represent that if we are a part of the human condition, that we can see other people suffering and be a light to them. There we go. You don't have to agree with him. You don't have to agree with me. But I want to try to make sense of his argument so that it can also push us to figure out, why do I disagree with this person? Is it because I just want to disagree so I don't have to change my thought process? Or is it because he's just dead wrong? And that's okay. Henri Nouwen was ordained a Catholic priest. Many of you, when you hear him, are going to hear a French accent, but the majority of his life and his education was in the Netherlands. He basically was trained outside of high school, what we consider high school, and then as a priest studied psychology. And then even after that, in his studies in Europe, then came over to get his doctorate and postdoc in Kansas, of all places, which is cool, I think. I haven't been there yet. They're part of the Big 12, and I'm a West Virginia University fan.
Very flat.
It's very flat.
It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there.
Just keeps going. He was born in the 30s. He died in 1996. And it was an abrupt heart attack that took place when he was going back, not permanently, but visiting the Netherlands again. He was a part in the civil rights movement. He did march in Selma at that time. His career, from an education standpoint, started in Notre Dame, and the majority of his academic career was at Yale Divinity, or Yale University. 1986, I think, was the start date. I could be wrong, but that was the year I was born. I never met the man, but we do have at that seminary a small chapel for him, and it speaks exactly like his spirit. You have to enter the library, and you have to go to the basement, to a room where there are no windows, to enter a very small room, which is the chapel, and there's like a skylight that you can see. But it's the smallest chapel at the entire seminary, and we would go there for like Vespers with our Lutheran brothers and sisters, or Evensong, or Compline, which is one of my favorite liturgies in the Book of Common Prayer. But we would go there, and it was just a very intimate, simple place to be alone in your thoughts and with a small group of people. He was, I was wrong. Okay, Yale was 1971, 1981. Then he spent some time in Latin America, where he had a half-time position at Harvard Divinity School, which I think at the time was still Harvard Theological Seminary. Do you have any? I don't know. Which is now closed, I think, or in union with another seminary. But he worked half of his time in Latin America, and he wrote during that time. Very prolific writer, and where most of his books came from that are very popular or for his time when he was in the L'Arche project, which was, he was working with developmentally disabled individuals. And when he was having a crisis of faith, a priest having a crisis of faith, heaven forbid, but the whole idea is basically he asked, he was starting to question, what does it look like to have a Eucharistic community? And he truly felt at home and discerned and called to that place. So, how many of you have ever read anything from Henri Nouwen before? What books come to mind?
Return of the Prodigal Son.
Anybody else?
I didn't realize that was the author. Yes, we have.
Yes. Okay, so.
And I had a daily devotional that had a lot of his excerpts from his writings that I can't quote where, but they have a lot of excerpts from there that ponder. And
the Return of the Prodigal Son is actually. Oh, I'm going to show you now in chapel. I love it because an artist, when he died, who's a friend of his, created this. When you close it, it's hard to see because it's a small, everybody's so far out. But there's a sun and a moon and the tree of heaven. And then when you open it up, you see Jesus Christ on top of the world. And then what they would consider saints of that time. So you have Oscar Romero in there. You have Mother Teresa, and I can't recall. But if you Google that image and put Nouwen Chapel, it's beautiful. He was a prolific writer. His most famous book was actually, this is a picture I took of the 5 that I own. I haven't read them all, sadly. But this is what our church last year studied. And this is actually one of the last books he wrote, but it's also his most famous. And this The Wounded Healer sort of comes in a close second. But when it was written in the 70s, if you don't have a hard copy of the book, the audible version, the language is very different from what you're reading today. And the preface will tell you that if you have this version of the book. The language was changed to be more neutral and gendered language, and it was also meant to be not seen as just simply for people with a collar, because that was never his point. Was to try to, as it would say in 1 Peter, the priesthood of all believers, that we were all called to be ministers in our own right. Has anybody ever asked you to teach a class in church and you're like, oh, I can't do that? I don't know how to teach a class. Yes, you can. It was sort of that nature. It's like you can be called to do anything if you don't feel that you have that need. But he wrote over 39 books, and not to mention scholastic articles. And here's something that I always think is very interesting. Yes, he was ordained clergy, but he never really had a parochial role. He was never in a parish setting, if you will. Yet he had, despite if we agree or disagree with different books and his thoughts, more of an impact on people than sometimes we feel that we can have an impact. And my favorite thing is that we really never know what impact we individually have on the people that we love and the stranger that we encounter. I wanted to put this here. Does anybody know who this man is? Sorry. Thomas Merton. Anybody ever read any Thomas Merton? He was a Cistercian monk. This is him in his get-up. This is him most of the time. He played a very large role later in Henri Nouwen's career as an influence. And I wanted to show some videos to get a sense of who Henri Nouwen is. And if you get a sense of who this man is, then maybe we may have better insight when we read his words to internalize it for ourselves. And now I just have to find the videos. This first one is him talking about Thomas Merton. I don't have one.
I met Thomas Merton when I was at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. And I met him because a friend invited me to go and see him. And I had really no much knowledge of Merton, nor that there was much interest, because I just didn't know much about him. And he's a very, so I met him and he said to my friend, he said, well, yeah, you and Henri Nouwen can come and visit me, but you better get a six-pack of beer, so we can do something nice to drink together. And so we got out and bought a six-pack of beer, and he met us around a little lake. It was a little lake that he was sitting around. And he was always in his blue jeans and his jacket. And he's a very, very, very down-to-earth person. He wasn't not at all somebody who was going to talk about deep spiritual things. He was very, very ordinary, good, down-to-earth, friendly man, with a big laugh, and a sense of humor, and no attempt to do holy or spiritual anything. He was just a very, very good man. And that's the first time I really met him. And the funniest thing about it is that after I met him, I wanted to read all his stuff and started to read his books. And then he died very soon after I met him, when he went to Thailand, to Bangkok. But that little meeting that I had, ordinary as it wasn't very special. He didn't say anything to me that I will always remember or nothing of that. It was very, very simple and very, very ordinary. Just guys getting together and having a beer, But still, I mean, that little meeting was important for me because somewhere the fruit of it sort of came much later. And after he died, I started to read very systematically his work, and he had an enormous influence on my thinking. Enormous influence. I mean, I got everything he wrote, and I wrote a little book about him, and I taught about him, and I gave courses about Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton had a big influence on my life, but because I gave so many courses on it, I made him also known to many other people.
Because what he wrote, even now, 25 years ago, still sounds fresh.
Yeah.
Still sounds contemporary.
Yeah, some of it, not all of it, but Thomas Merton had a whole development himself. If you read The Seven-Story Mountain, the book that made him known, all the way to his Asian journal on the end, I mean, you see a whole different Merton. I mean,
and you would hope to see.
And that's the exciting things about Merton. Merton is a man who was growing. And if you say, if you would say to him, well, what you say now contradicts what you say in the past, well, who cares? I mean, I used to say what I want to say now, and I'm not checking out if it's consistent. And it's a very, very beautiful person who really, and he is a great artist, great poet, and it might be that he, in the long run, will be most remembered because of his poetry. I mean, he's an incredible poet.
I wanted to stop there. When I had first seen this a couple years back, have you ever heard somebody get on somebody's case because they were, what's the term? I just have wishy-washy, or you're doing this thing. He's recognizing in himself, without hubris, and I think in Merton, that we grow continually, and our thoughts grow continually. So when we're reading this book, we're trying to be called to see where he is in his life now, in his mind, and how he's making sense of it to be a minister to other people. And I would say that, My worldview as a 4-year-old, from what I can remember, to my worldview now is different. And in some ways, I hope that as I continue to get older, that it sort of returns back to what my worldview was when I was 4. The magic of the world and the magic of other people is still very much there. This last one is a little bit longer, and this is a sermon that he gave, part of it, on the idea that we are the beloved of God. And I think this points to his sort of psychoanalysis of who we say we are, or what the world wants us to say that we are about ourselves. And is it consistent with what we as a Christian people believe? That's very loud. Hold on. I'm sorry.
Really grateful to be with you here this morning and to share my faith with you. And to the core of that faith belongs my conviction that you and that I and that we are the beloved daughters and sons of God. I might as well say that from the very beginning. We are the beloved sons and daughters of God. And one of the enormous spiritual tasks we have is to claim that and to live a life based on that knowledge. And that's not very easy. In fact, most of us fail constantly to claim the truths of who we are. I took this flip chart here to give you a little idea about how we often live our lives. If I draw a little line here, and I say, that's my life. My little chronology. You can also say, my little clock time. Well, I was born in 1932, and I wonder what I could put here. Maybe, 2010. It's not so bad. But that's really all I have. And now you may say, well, listen, I came a little later, so you came here. And you may say, oh, I have a few more years here. But it doesn't make very, very much difference. It's still a small little life that you have. Tiny little life that goes by very, very fast. Like that. And the question for you and for me is, who are we? Because that's the question that keeps us going. Because all during our lives we try to answer that question, who am I? And the first answer we live with is, I am what I do. And that's very real, you know. When I do good things and when I have a little success in life, I feel good about myself. But when I fail, then I start getting a little low or depressed. And then I'm getting older and I'd say I cannot do much, but look at the trophies. Look, I did a lot of good things in my life, or look at my books, or look at my music I wrote, or look at my children I educated, or look, I did something good. Or we might say, I am what other people say about me. What others say. You know, that's very, very powerful what people say about you. In fact, that sometimes is most important. If people speak well about you,
you can walk around quite freely. But when somebody starts talking behind your back, or when somebody starts saying negative things about you, you suddenly might feel very, very sad. You know, and I remember speaking to thousands of people, and people say, that was wonderful what you said. But there was one man who said, hey, he said, I thought it was a lot of nonsense. And that's the only man I remember. It seems as if when somebody talks against me or against you, that can cut deep into your heart. And when somebody in the morning said something about you that's really hurtful, somebody calls you stupid or so, it can stay with you the whole day and ruin your mood. And you might also say, I am what I have. I am what I have. I'm a Dutch person. I have kind parents. I have a good education. I have a good health. I have a lot of things. But as soon as I'm losing any of it, if a family member dies, or if my health goes, or if I lose the property I might have, then I can slip into inner darkness. And what I want you to hear for a moment, that quite often a lot of your and my energy goes into, I am what I do, I am what people say about me, I am what I have. And you know, when that's the case, our life quickly becomes like this. Because when people speak well about me, and when I have a lot of things, and when I do good things, I'm quite up. I'm excited.
This is normal, by the way, the train.
But when I start losing, when suddenly I find out that I cannot do anything anymore, when suddenly I find out that people talk against me, then finally I discover that I lose my friends, I might slip into depression and be very low. And before you realize it, you and I are on a zigzag. Because when we are up, when these things are all right, but we are down when we start losing out. And most of our work, mental work, then is to just stay above the line. And we call that surviving. We want to survive. We want to hold on to our good name, hold on to some good product, hold on to our property. But we know somewhere that on the end there is a word that says you're going to die after all. And you know, when you live this kind of life, with all these ups and downs, the end is death. And when you are dead, you're dead.
You did.
You can't do anything anymore. You lose it all. And that little life of you and of mine ends up into nothing. And what I want to say to you today is that this whole thing is wrong. That is not who you are, and that is not who I am. That's what the demon said to Jesus when he went to the desert. He says, turn these stones into bread and show you can do something. Jump from the temple and let people catch you so they speak well about you. Kneel in front of me and then I will give you a lot of possessions. Then you are loved because you do something people speak well about you, and you have something, and everybody gonna love you. And Jesus says, that's a lie. That's the greatest lie that makes you and me enter into relationships of violence and destruction. Because I know who I am. I know who I am. Because before the Spirit sent me to be tempted, the Spirit came upon me and says, you are the beloved child. You are my beloved son. On you my favor rests. That's who you are. That's who I am. And Jesus heard that voice. You are my beloved. On you my favor rests. And it was that voice that he clung to as he lived his life. And people praised him, and people rejected him, and people said Hosanna, and people crucified him. But Jesus held on to the truth. Whatever happens, I am the beloved of God. And that is who I am. And that allows me to live in a world that keeps rejecting me, or praising me, or laughing at me, or spitting on me. I am the beloved. Not because people say I'm great, but because I am the beloved even before I was born. And
I was watching body language. I saw some people cringing and some people being like, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. So this is good. We're going to have a great seminar. This video I find interesting because last Sunday we talked about the temptations of Jesus in the wilderness in Luke chapter 4. I couldn't have planned this myself. This is pretty cool. And then one of my favorite scriptures is, I knew you before you were knit in the womb. I was talking about I think it was Zechariah, correct? The prophet, or was it Jeremiah? I'm sure. I can't remember. One of the many prophets. Thank you, Zechariah. But I believe that method and that message is not just for him. It was for all of us. That God knew us before we were knit in the womb. And I would have to confess that I live a zigzag life. And sometimes that makes me not feel too good about, shouldn't I be able to remember that message? But he recognizes that, and I think that he would recognize that he also lives that life, and he's trying to strive constantly to remind himself who he truly is. And the Christian message, and Jesus, I think, tries to show us who we are. That's a weird sound. It's God calling. Anybody ever watch Dead Poet Society? It's one of my favorite movies. There's a call that comes in when they're having chapel, and he picks up the phone. He's like, to the headmaster, it's God. He says we should have girls at Welton or something like that. Robin Williams, that was stupid. Now, if the call had been collect, that would have been daring. So, the different videos that I wanted to show are, he had an appreciation for simple things. This is the guy that wanted to sit down with you and have a beer. He appreciated the fact that somebody didn't try to proselytize him immediately. And it was something about a sit down with just another human being who was acting just like another normal human being, that somehow there was an infectious yearning to figure out who this person was more intimately, which is why he wanted to learn more about Thomas Merton. And Thomas, again, is there with the young Dalai Lama. Yeah. So again, we often put people on these false pedestals of like they're larger than life, but they're also normal human beings. And the larger than life aspect is, I think that was a pretty powerful sermon. And I guarantee you he believed it. from that standpoint, I'm going to say a few more things and then just try to open it up to everybody if you have read about certain things. But these basic expectations for a time together, whenever we get together, I hope that there's a covenant that if you're like me and you find that you talk a lot, to make room for others to share as well, and to listen before you respond. It's very important to do. And that if you've had a turn, to let somebody else have a turn as well. The areas that we're going to be going over are going to be a chapter each week. And if there are areas of disagreement, which there will be, I guarantee it, because last time there was disagreement, and we're talking about Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son as a painting, right? So it's all relative in art history, I guess. But basically trying to figure out, well, where's this person that's talking to me coming from? Where is the author coming from? What place am I coming from when I'm reading this? And why do I think I'm having this gut reaction to begin with? Am I at a high in my life, or am I currently at a low? Is that affecting how I'm reading this book? And then when you also are reading, there would be some things that you can do ahead of time that would be helpful. In this first chapter, you're going to be running into a character named Pete. If he shares personal narrative, his own stories, that was one of the biggest things that he tried to do, was try to make it real. So he would share his experiences. What were those experiences? Who were the key players? Are there terms there, like in the Audible version, the 1972 book, it said the nuclear man? Well, in this reading, it's changed a little bit. But, I found that confusing. I had to read it twice to figure out what on earth was he talking about. Was he talking out because of the threat of nuclear disaster, or was he talking about a nuclear family, or things of that nature? If you have questions or personal stories or terms and phrases, or if you're confused by something, highlight it and bring those questions to our time together. When I was thinking about this, I know that, and I'm envious, Church of the Incarnation, for those of you who don't know, I think does a weekly Bible study, correct? And I think everybody's invited, correct? So yeah, come on. I don't know. Everybody comes. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's hit on Ecclesiastes before. A lot of people don't like this book because it sounds depressing. It's actually my favorite book of the Bible, which may say something about myself. But if you heard the bird song, "Turn, Turn, Turn," well, like that's from Ecclesiastes. There you go. All right, it's all good. Chapter 1. He's going to make some suppositions in the introduction, and then you're going to find it more in chapter 1 as well, that he believes that some of the feelings of despair that he's observing are unique to this time. And I want you to, maybe the question is it actually that unique? And you could go, that's a point where I would disagree with. The times are different, but the situations are the same, maybe? I don't know. Counting me on that. But Ecclesiastes 1, this is supposedly from, the translation I had says preacher, but it differs, but Solomon. Says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Doesn't that sound like a fun thing you want to read all the time? Nothing is new under the sun, all of these different things. But when you get home, I would love if you would read through this, trying to understand, that this was an idea that what is the disposition of a human being, especially if you've ever given counsel to a family member, or if you have a counseling background, when somebody's at their lowest of low, do they feel like they just can't move anywhere or do anything? Nothing is new under the sun. If I work really hard, it's still going to be taken away. People that we deal with, maybe not yourselves, but people that we deal with have had these feelings and experiences before. And we're called to enter into them and try to understand them as brothers and sisters of Christ. And then on the flip side, I found this on Facebook. Did you put this on Facebook? Because I thought, I reshared this. That was awesome. It says, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it. Which I thought was funny. It's a bit cynical, but, if you laughed, then it resonated with you to some degree. I think my dad said that to me, and he was He's a lawyer, so retired. And he's the first one that told me the joke. What do you call 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean?
A good start.
A good start. So he was pretty comfortable with himself to be able to say that. But then, this idea of who am I, he's going to go with this idea that fights with the fact that if you feel like you're inadequate for something, God's still calling. Which is why I was saying that if I was using just a church example about teaching a class. Well, I'm not a teacher, or never taught anything. Well, we all have something that we can share. And there's different calls here. This one was just from Exodus 3, the call of Moses. Whenever God calls anybody, it's like Moses, like Moshe, or the call of Samuel, Shemuel. And they're all like, I'm here, what's up? This is the famous portion where he's going up in the mountain. He finds the burning bush, and he says, after I am here, that I have seen the oppression of my people, and I am sending you. Moses said this, I'm nobody. How can I go to the king and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God answered, I will be with you. There are countless examples in the Old Testament of this happening. With Elisha, and these characters for us seem larger than life, but they were people. And I think it was in James, the book of James, chapter 5, verse 7. I don't know it by heart. I don't know many scripture by heart. But it was trying to talk about Elijah the prophet and saying that he was not an angel. He was flesh and blood like you and me, and yet he was still called to God. So it reminds me that we are all in this same scenario together. So my hope is that this book will help you figure out the questions of, well, how do I view the world, and where do I fit in? Especially when I feel inadequate to do something. Do I have the skill set then to move forward? Because sometimes, I don't know where to begin. And I think Henri is, to some degree, trying to say, well, that's a good starting point. 1 Peter 2. And if you also read in Hebrews, you hear about the priesthood of all believers. Can anybody see the screen except for me? Does anybody want to read that? Joe, you're awesome. Thank you.
Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind, as you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Thank you. I'm wearing my Fred Rogers shoes today. How does this make you feel when you hear this?
Well, it resonates with Nouwen's sermon. That we are a holy people. If we are children of God, then we are a holy people. There's always hope.
Yes. What about the term royal priesthood? Does it sit comfortably or uncomfortably? Do we know what is being said contextually to make sense of that? So, I love this thing because, I got a new one actually because the other one, my daughter decided to turn into a tie. I was always told that this was a dog collar, and it wasn't for other people's benefit. It was to remind me that I was not subservient, but that I had accepted a call to try to adhere to a particular ministry that I've been called into. It's sort of like if anybody ever wears jewelry, like a cross, or when I was younger we had a "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet. Do you remember when that was like all the rage? The "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet. Is it so that other people would see, oh look at how much jewelry that person has, they must be a Christian? No, the person that told me about the dog collar said it was whenever you look in the mirror to remind yourself of who you are and not to let the world, keep you from losing that sense of who you are. I don't always wear, yes.
I noticed that Henri, did wear a collar and everything.
Most of his career, he didn't have one, but again, he didn't serve in a parochial setting. He wasn't a vicar. He wasn't a priest in charge, or I don't know if the Catholics, he's called Reverend probably more than Father, or Professor actually probably more than anything else in the world. But we're all called into different ministries. Yet he was still a priest, and I'm not here to say whether that's a good or bad thing, but you'd be surprised. I think it's important that people wear the collar, and I don't wear the collar a lot. And this says something about me, I guess. I got tired of people looking at me like I was a saint without knowing who I was, or that I was dangerous without knowing who I am.
Well, because with the collar, you represent a symbol.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not, there is a certain symbol in someone's head that's what you represent. Anything that goes outside of that image that they have is going to make them uncomfortable or look at you in a right or wrong sense because you don't fit that image that symbol represents.
And it's hard.
If you wore high heels, people would look at you differently also.
Sure. And I think it's no. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because people ask me if this is sometimes a fashion, something I'm wearing, or when they go. They say, "Who are you?" And I'll say, "I'm a priest," and their mind blows because I'm not a man. So how? Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's. But no, lack of femininity, I'm sure.
But these distinctions are very real. And I was just up in Fredericksburg, and we're going to a commissional ministry meeting, and every priest has these hookups and issues sometimes that they have to deal with. The funniest thing that I ever had was when we went to convention one year, and there were 3 priests that went to an Italian restaurant. We came out. I told you about that one. Oh, you were with us.
Yeah.
There's some guys in the back of a pickup truck, and they started singing Madonna's "Like a Virgin."
I stepped away from it.
Yeah. But again, it was they thought of me and us as something, and it was negative toward I would say colleagues. They differ from the Episcopal Church, but they're still ordained to a particular ministry, which is why you saw Henri or Thomas Merton. He was a monk with another monk, and they had something that was intimate despite their differences that brought them together. I think it's really pretty.
2 comments.
Yes, please. Yes.
A very important text for us Lutherans who, with Luther's guidance, recognize that all the baptized are priests called to a particular vocation that is lived out not just in terms of being a priest, but whatever work we do is holy work on behalf of people in God's desire for all to have good things. Regarding the collar, it opened doors for me. It allowed me into places that if I had been wearing a tie, I would not have been allowed to go. And it provided great opportunities to speak a word, not necessarily the right word, but a word that meant something at that time for the place that this collar had allowed me to enter, be it a person's life, be in an emergency room where someone was dying, being at the time of some event that was joyful. It wasn't a problem for me to wear a collar, except when I got home.
Well, the collar that he first wore when he was ordained in the seminary was made, it was like yours,
Yeah.
it was made out of asbestos.
Oh my Lord.
Well,
So if you caught on fire, that would still be good.
the story was that you'd be able to identify the pastors who went to hell because
I learned something today. No, and you're exactly right. You'd be surprised that, and then that's sort of the thing. It's whenever I didn't wear a collar when I was in seminary to do hospital chaplaincy, but a lot of times you may visit a loved one or a friend or a church member, in there. And the biggest fear for a lot of people is just simply going through that door because they don't know maybe what to expect.
or what to say.
Or what to say.
And sometimes it's better not to say anything. Just be there, just to be present.
I've shared in a sermon before that I was an idiot that said it's all going to be all right. Well, to them it wasn't. No!
You're going to be fine. Now the doctor just told me I'm going to die.
Yeah, and to me, I needed to say you're going to be fine because I was uncomfortable in the space. I don't know if anybody's ever felt that same way. The last thing I wanted to go over in this reading here was once you were not a people. I would like to say that there are many individuals, those that aren't actually brought up in a church tradition to begin with, those that end up finding a church often feel that they have been rejected, that they're not a people to either their family, and they're looking for a home. And the best thing that I like about church is that it's supposed to be messy, because family is messy. Has anybody ever had a Thanksgiving where you just, let's sit this person over here and this person over here just so they don't get together? But, God, the writer here is trying to basically talk about how you are being invited into a covenantal relationship with other people. And I'm not sure how many different representations we have from churches today. I know that Incarnation, I know many of you are here. I think a few from St. Jude's, don't know anything else, but the important thing is that, all of us, I believe, have the common lectionary. We're reading the same readings. We're saying the same prayers. We're a closer knit body than we might realize. And I would love to figure out what that might look like if we lived into it a little bit more. Me included. Long story short, the introduction. Who has read the 2 pages, the daunting 2 pages?
And then some.
And then some. He's going to start, I'm going to go down with the 4 chapters. He sort of works his way backward. He goes with a world-size issue, which is why it seems very daunting if you're reading it, to a generational issue. I'm sadly a millennial now, but I identify more with the Gen Xers, to be honest. And I also don't like being lumped into being told what generation I'm a part of, but I grew up in the grunge movement, with Pearl Jam and Nirvana, things of that nature, and I loved how, their angst and their sense of listlessness to some degree made sense to our generation at that time. Trying to understand where people are coming from, what they're facing. The fact that my child, when she grows, will be some of the first generation that has grown up that has a digital footprint from the very moment they took their first breath. Whereas many of us can remember what life was like before the internet existed. I still remember when I broke a dot matrix, or I broke a VCR by putting dot matrix paper into it to try to figure out how a VCR actually worked. It's not good. And then suffering of an individual human, anybody, sorry. And then the condition of a suffering minister. A lot of times we don't know the strengths and hurts that people carry. A lot of times people don't know your own triggers as well. Lord knows I have made mistakes, and I have found times only after the fact that I realized, did I make something about me? Or did I not listen? I talked when I should have listened, things of those nature. And all ministers, all individuals, I think, face these commonalities. If we try to work together, In this society, how many of you have grown up in a rural setting most of your life? Rural. City life. No, I'm saying rural and then city life. City? How many of you to this day could go to your next door neighbor and ask for a cup of sugar?
Today?
Still? Today. Good.
In this house, in this neighborhood, yes, not in
You're right in the city, grew up, right? Or time where you grew up, or now? I grew up in a big city and now I live in a rural one.
Right. Well, so Diana was saying that when you were in the city.
So I could go to my neighbor today and ask for sugar, but I didn't even know my neighbors in Arlington, and we lived there for 15 years.
Yeah.
I didn't know who they were.
Right. So my point in getting to this is that these different circumstances present different opportunities for people to get together. When I lived in Richmond, my first call was right out of seminary as an assistant. I had a full street of neighbors that were in a stone's throw away, actually less than. And once they found out that we were moving, was when we finally connected, and they said, "Oh, we don't want you to leave." And then now we live on a property where each house next to us is about an acre away. We talk to each other at least 3 times a week. And my point of saying that is that when the world may have seemed smaller for us, it was easier. We tried harder, or maybe it was more necessary to try to maintain relationships despite our disagreements. And when the social media era, well, you can get a friend by clicking a button. And if you disagree with them, you can unfriend them, because there's always more friends to be had. That's a disjointed nature that we have with a younger generation right now in college. I have a lot of teenagers that talk to me about they don't really feel that they have a cohesive peer group to sit with, because their school group is different from their social media identity, and their social media identity doesn't reflect their reality. So chapter 1, try to use those examples to make sense of where he's going. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Do you want to say anything about the context of the 1970s?
Anybody want to say anything about the context of the 1970s? Because I was born in 1986.
The late 60s and 70s, that was definitely a hard time. The Vietnam War was growing strong in the 60s, and then it slowly went down. But still, you had a lot of people against the war. The vets came back, but they didn't get any credits. It wasn't like World War II or Korea. And it was a different time.
I remember my parents talking a lot about gas shortages. Also, the first house that they bought was the house that they still live in now. It was bought in the 70s, and it was 14% interest. Which is one of the reasons that they never bought another house. But I mean,
how much did they pay for it?
Oh, I don't know. I know that in West Virginia, they're probably going to get a little bit more than what they paid for back in the 70s. Because I love where I grew up, but that's another story. It's just more people are leaving than coming in. Property value is very low. Yes?
In the 70s, I had small children, and I was a particular group who did not bother with the group that was protesting and so on. But then things would come into your life unbidden. My brother came back from the Vietnam War, and he was not the guy that left for the Vietnam War. He was a totally different person. It was shocking, and something I couldn't turn my head away from. So that's how it was. You were in your own little cubicle, and then every once in a while somebody from another cubicle comes in, and you had to accept it. It was a hard time.
I can remember being in high school, and one day we were sitting in class. I went to Catholic school, and the principal came in, and she had to tell one of my friends that his brother had just got killed in Vietnam. Right there in the classroom, and we all just, yeah. My husband said when he came back from Vietnam, he got spit at the airport. Yeah. It's a rough time. And I can remember when I was growing up, I was in a big city outside of Boston, and we were sitting on the porch, and all of a sudden they had the racial wars going on, and all of a sudden my father yells, "Hit the deck!" We all had to lay down on the porch because there was a car coming by with tinted windows, and we could see the guns pointing out of the windows. Oh, so it was, yeah.
There was a lot of
Unrest.
Yeah, we had the assassinations, we had
There was a lot of rioting.
A lot of rioting, a lot of
that, and the police coming to our door and telling my parents to keep a gun inside the door. If they come to your door, shoot them, pull them inside, and like close the door. Like it was a very crazy time.
Fall of 1970, Richard Nixon and Billy Graham came to Neyland Stadium at the University of Tennessee, and the university is essentially shut down. And there were snipers and people with binoculars up on the Ayers Tower and the Glung Library, which was a huge 15-story building. And it was a mess.
It was exam week also.
It was exam week.
I was in Saigon 67, 68. My parents were worried about me, and I'm worried about them because they were caught in the riots in Newark at the same time.
They're still rioting in Newark.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the airport?
And what was the culture of the church during that time? How would you differentiate how would you identify what was happening in the church then?
Tradition.
28 per book. sorry.
We had a very strong church because that's the only place you felt safe.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Very, very
You're trying to
religious.
stick to tradition because the 60s movement was so out there that there's, okay, we want to try to swing back, and that was almost counterproductive because it swung too far to the other side.
Yeah, forget
And that's when they were changing the right to.
Yeah.
The right to and filling out long forms. Yeah.
Yeah, all kinds of different,
What
different books, Hebrew books, and
You'd be in
child
church,
liturgies.
you'd be in church and somebody would be reciting the old liturgy while they were doing the new liturgy.
I've heard of priests that actually chained their 28 per book to the pew because they didn't want it taken out, and I knew some that were ecstatic about. It was interesting because we also, and I forget, Laurel, what was the priest's name?
Jonathan Daniels.
Jonathan Daniels.
Oh, yeah.
He was shot and killed in Selma.
Well, just
not
south of Selma.
Simply trying to protect somebody
Yeah.
where the gun was for somebody else.
I
just
think
out of the way.
that's the summer in '65 when my life really changed more to go into church because Jonathan Daniels spent a week with us teenagers at church camp in New Hampshire. He was from Keene, New Hampshire. And we just all loved Jonathan Daniels. He was so good to us and he was so cute. And he was 16 years old and you get this gung-ho seminarian who wants to go back to Mississippi to try to solve the problems of the world. And all of a sudden you find out in August that he's just standing and going in front of a young black girl and a sheriff's deputy shoots him dead,
He
And
grabbed her.
it is amazing. And he is one of two people as a martyr identified in Canterbury, in the church, because he and Martin Luther King. And they just had a big write-up about him in the Richmond paper again. He was a very special person in my life, and it really made me open my eyes to what the world. I was, Miss Pollyanna growing up in New Hampshire, what did I know? And all of a sudden, Jonathan Daniels is dead. And I'm going to do a trip in October. The company I like to travel with is doing a freedom watch and walk. We start in Jackson, Mississippi, and go over to Montgomery, Alabama, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Mobile. And we're going to follow all those freedom walks and things. They actually have a museum now in Montgomery about the lynchings that went on. And, but Jonathan Daniels was a very, very special person to me. And every time I opened up the paper a couple weeks ago and I started, there's Jonathan Daniels looking at me. So he is a very special person.
You know, this is one of the reasons I was telling Father Alex that I have a hard time with this book, because it's very much woe is me. You know, I'm just, you know, a butterfly or a leaf in the wind that you know, I have to go with wherever the wind takes me. I have no control. I don't control my own destiny. It upsets me because people like that, people like Martin Luther King, people like Abraham Lincoln, all these people who were single people, Muhammad Gandhi, who made a difference. You know, you can control things. You can shape things for other people, even though you're just one person. To have this fatalistic attitude of woe is me just really gets under my skin.
I would like to counter, though, in that he's not saying that everybody is like that all the time. If you read, if you read the private journals of Mother Teresa, did she actively take and bring about change?
Absolutely.
Had we not seen her journals, would we ever know that she had crises of faith? That she, no.
Well, she was human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
it, and she had her highs.
You know, no one expects anybody to be a perfect person.
Right.
But you still, you know, we all have our demons. But
Oh,
you're
yeah.
still striving to do the right thing. But if you're just going to drift in the wind, then what's
But
the
there
point of
may
that?
be good
You
in
know?
identifying that people do drift in the wind. How can we help them out of that? Or if you feel like you're drifting in the wind now, there are answers that he provides saying that there are ways out of it. I don't think it's a completely fatalistic Hawthorne book of, I'm not a big Nathaniel Hawthorne fan. You know, the A, Scarlet Letter, or I know this is not by him, I don't think, but The Test of the D'Urbervilles.
Oh, that's another one.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And sometimes I think, you know, we just visited the Lincoln Library and Museum, and I was so taken back, and it was very well done if you're ever out there in Springfield. But you know, he didn't know the impact he had on the world, and when he died, he still felt woe is me. And I think he felt like he was doing all he could, but that it might not have really mattered. And you know, it took a long time for that to come back around. People really didn't appreciate it even then. So look how many years later people do talk about him with reverence and appreciation for that he was standing up for things that he knew, you know, he knew that it was wrong and he had wanted to stop it, but he didn't feel like he'd made the difference that he ended up making.
And if I can share my personal experience growing up, and I look to the kids now where it's normal for them. Columbine was when I was in middle school, and the next year they introduced video cameras and metal detectors into our school in every single room aside from the bathrooms. Before then, you know, September 11th, I grew up in the 90s bubble where things actually did seem pretty darn safe. And then 2001 happened. I remember I was in sophomore English class, Miss Tennell's English class. And then everybody was asked to stop and look at the television, just like people, if there was a radio or something like that, they got to stop and listen to the Apollo 13 mission in class, the touchdown. The circumstances were different, but you'd be surprised of what things are shaping you. And it would be disheartening to say, well, you don't know what bad is. Because everybody, at least at some point, is going through their own individual bad and their own individual ups and downs. Which I go back to Ecclesiastes 1, which what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. I sort of joke and say, well, we've got smartphones now. But there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. And I think history repeating itself, or what are some timeless conditions of the human, or what are timeless aspects of the human condition? Being hungry, having a loved one die.
So how about the kids today who want to actually erase our history?
But you can't erase your history.
No, but we're definitely not the only generation that's ever tried to do that. Ever. From an archaeology standpoint, which is what I basically studied, go with it. There's a TV show called Futurama. I don't know if anybody, okay. And they were trying to go through world history because they had a time machine, and they were basically showing one civilization that was more powerful than the other one, taking over, destroying, and rebuilding time and time again. It says, what's going on? It says, history. That was the cheeky joke about it, but you've had, Rome's a great example. After Jesus died and there was a rebellion, a Jewish rebellion in the 70s, they destroyed the temple, which is where the Dome of the Rock now sits. And we have a basic idea of what the temple might look like, but we're not allowed access to try to do good archaeology to figure it out. For that, we're very, erasing history and I can't remember who told me this. This history is often written by the people that are winning or victorious. And in different eras, they're the ones that have the voice to put the lines. I do find it disheartening to some degree, but I don't think it's unique to our time.
I'm not sure that a couple of weeks ago, there's actually a book out, and it's called The Dash. And it is a book that you know, I've heard of. And it goes from your birth date, and then there's a dash, and then there's your death date. And so, as Nouwen was saying, there's this line. You know, some call it a dash, some call it this line. My sense is that it's our expectations which create those highs and lows, and how we respond to them. So, the Christian life is one that's saying, you know, if I'm going to live a life that's going to follow Christ, and that's what my priority is, then the highs and the lows kind of take themselves out of the picture, I think. Because our eyes on the prize, it's on service. It's not about what we have, who people think we are, as he was talking about. So the ultimate would be to be able to celebrate those things that happen to us, as some of the martyrs have done before us too. And Mother Teresa said, you know, today was a bad day, but it's not going to go behind me. I'm not going to take it below the line today, because I did what I was called to do, because I was called to act as a disciple, or as to serve Jesus, or to be in some kind of a servant role. And we see that a lot with people who are in third world countries. What we perceive that we would think they were having a terrible life. They have no floors in their house. They may not have electricity.
They don't have first world problems.
Right. You know, things that we would presume that they have which are all on the bottom of the line. They're going, well, you know what? This is a great day because I have my family with me. I have enough food to eat, and I have some shelter. And so theirs are all spiking on top because their expectations are different. So,
do you know the author of that?
Of the Dash is? No, but you can buy the book. It's if you look, oh, there you go. It's a story.
Linda Ellis and Mac Anderson. Thank you.
No, he said the author.
No. I for me personally, sorry, I wanted to read it.
Yes, she was asking who it was.
Oh, Mac Anderson and Linda Ellis.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
I don't want to go too far afield, but before we close, is there anything that anybody would like to bring up before we meet next week?
So what is our homework for next week, so we
Thank
can
you.
come prepared and have a discussion?
Chapter 1.
You were blocking us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
Sorry.
Chapter 1 is called Ministry in a Dislocated World. that'd be fine.
So people can start to learn their names.
And then try to actually hang out with each other.
Right.
Okay. That'd be fine.
And
that's
maybe
great.
something they're doing for Lent that they're not usually doing.
Goodness. Yeah, that's
Don't do that.
You don't make it hard.
No, you have had, everyone has had homework, so you should be doing something for Lent. And if you're not, then fake it until you can make it.
Well, that's good, because there was an interesting thing where I know that a lot of people typically try to give something up, but I've also had people take something on during Lent. Like if they're bad at self-care, they're going to do this and stick with it, So I actually think it's sort of cool. And you could always say pass, yes. I'm Alex Riffy, and I've been here for about 5 years. And I think many of you have at least met Emma, my little girl. I have another one that's, actually today is 5 months. 5 months today, which is cool.
Wow,
Her name is Margaret Ann. Yeah, time's getting really fast now. And I know when I said I was born in '86, I wasn't trying to poke fun at anything. It's just it's a reality that we all see each other as peers, and we should, because we're brothers and sisters in Christ. But we all have different experiences. I can only share my own, and I want everybody to be able to share theirs as well.
Until you start mentioning, did you see this movie? And I'm going to talk.
Yeah, I watched it.
Yeah. All right, have you seen The Boss Baby 2, whatever it is? The Boss Baby 2?
No, I have not. But
I'm surprised.
Diane, can we start with you? We'll go on the inside and out, if that's okay?
Okay. I'm Diana Rivera, and I've been in the mineral area since 2012, when I had to retire abruptly, but that's neither here or there anymore, because I'm a happy girl now. I'm not going to give up anything for Lent, because I want to celebrate that God gave his life for me, and therefore my thing for Lent this year, and I've been really good, is to do a good deed for somebody every day. That's for me. And this is my other house. Go ahead.
I'm Joe Rivera, the resident nutjob. Those of you who know me, I've got a little bit of an eccentric sense of humor, but I try hard. Anyway, I think I'm a closet tree hugger, so I'm going to give up plastic.
Wearing it? Okay, we'll pass. My name's Laura. Some people call me Mother Spice. For Lent, for Lent, my new discipline is every beggar that I meet, based off of the scripture from several weeks ago that said that you should give something to everyone you meet. I have upped my game, and I'm giving $5 to every person that I meet. When I give it to them, my tradition is I always ask what their name is. And it always interests them or intrigues them. There's a gentleman in Fredericksburg who is by the Costco, and I see him often. And I asked him again, I said, tell me your name again. He goes, Bruce. He says, I remember you. And I'm like, because how many people ask him who his name is?
Yeah.
And so we actually had a conversation. So that's my perspective.
I'm Nancy Thomas. I've been here 30-some years. I'm a retired school teacher, and my Lent project is ongoing since the day I was born. Anyway, now I...
You mean your husband?
No, I actually was not born with him. It does appear differently sometimes. It's trying to do better at the things that I do. Let's just put it that way. Jane, you're on. I'm
Quit. All right, I'm Jane Keller, and I am trying to verbalize, at least in my head, the many ways that I'm thankful and the many things that I'm thankful for.
I'm Nancy Moser. I moved here to Louisa County
about 40-some years ago. I'll never be able to.
Didn't you move from Orange County? But didn't you move from Orange County? Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Nancy. That's all right. The Orange County native over there. And I'm a retired nurse, and I didn't really give up anything for Lent, but I'm trying to improve on some things personally. I'm trying to be that good person that goes for that mile walk every day. It's been rough. It's good.
I'm Marie Farrell. I give up playing games on my iPad and using that time to pray or read or be more productive. And I also, every Lent, choose someone every day to dedicate in prayer and send them a note. And that's very rewarding. Well, it just deepens my reflection of my journey.
So I wouldn't be No, I always, usually I try to not eat.
And who did you say you were?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Sherry Cole. I'm Sherry Cole. I've been in this church since, I guess, I'm originally from Canada, but I'm here now. And I usually give up sweets and goodies for Lent just as a way to make myself feel like, to remind me that this is a time of and I'm working on trying to read this book and get something out of that. And it's been a long time, sweet people. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I'm Diane Alfano. I've only been in Louisa since 2010. A member of this church since 2017. And for Lent, I'm not giving up anything, but I am trying to become more organized. It's so hard. It's so hard.
That's a good discipline. I'm Jill Schumacher, and we moved to Mineral in 2012 full-time, and I've been a member of this church since then. For Lent, I did the same thing, Diana. I'm trying to do one nice thing, cognitively for a different person every day, and I'm also trying to be kinder to my body and eat more healthy. And so I'm trying to do that during Lent, just to be cognizant of everything that's going in.
I'm Laurel Patterson. I've been here for 17 years. I am a prenatal Episcopalian, so it was just natural for me to come to St. James. And I am originally from New Hampshire and will soon be back there. I'm going to be moving this summer to New Hampshire. As soon as I sell my house, and everybody buy a house, you know. I live out in Blue Ridge Shores. It's a lovely place. Michael would be your neighbor. He's not really too bad, you know. I don't give up anything for Lent either. I just try to keep every day doing the best I can and surviving and being kind. So that's me.
My name is Mike Burnett. My wife and I moved here full-time in Maine. Our home was in Fairfax. And what I'm giving up is the fact that I can't go home.
Wow.
I know, and that's the hard part. Done. Clear.
I'm Margaret Wood. Born in Louisa, but I married a military man, so we traveled around and back in Mineral since 2002, I think it was. And for that, I'm giving up sweets, added sugar, actually, because it's hard to give up sweets and everything. That's true. But I'm also trying to stay on my exercise and keep my body healthy. And that's a job.
I'm Randy Kyle. I've been in Louisa County since 2014. Now I work in Brisbane as part of Louisa. church 2015. So I don't typically give anything up, and any sweets and things that people talk about, that's not where I'm at.
I'm Pat Gibbons, and I'm a retired psych nurse. I grew up in Buckingham County, went to Mary Washington, then Marine, and spent 30 years traveling different places, cross country a lot. So I had a lot of the experiences of you. I felt like in California you could die in your house and nobody would care, let alone know. I usually give up things for Lent. I really have given up Coca-Cola, which was a major weakness, but I think my decision this year was to be a little more self-reflective and to decrease the clutter in my mind and around me, and just be more healthy.
I'm Claudia DeVos. My husband and I are one of the Luciferians. We moved here almost 16 years ago. And we were living in Northern Virginia. Prior to that was Michigan. And we enjoy it out here. We're both retired. And giving something up. I'm giving up doing too much and trying to focus and taking care of myself right now. And taxes.
I didn't say I've been here 20 years. 20 years. Not every spot's a name there. Across the pond.
And I'm Jim, and I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. Been moving east ever since.
How hard is that?
And
Okay.
I'm the junior warden at Incarnation. Anybody wants a job?
As my mentor Tony Jarvis said, "May you have a golden crown in heaven, my son." Yeah, so our junior wardens are always very special.
Randy's our senior board, and I don't think he wants to give it up yet.
I'll give a real share, right?
Jim asked me how long we have to do that, and I said in perpetuity.
Perpetuity.
I am Rick Arlo. I am the other half of Motor Spice. And I'm retired military. We've been in the general area since 2012. And I am just more reflective of my personal journey during Lent.
I'm Liz Blanchard. We've lived here about 15 years, and I haven't given up anything for Lent. I just want to crochet faster because I'm behind by baby blankets.
I'm so Blanchard, I'm with her, but I don't crochet. I'm not going to give up anything. I'm just going to keep working on my honey-do list.
You go, Bill.
I'm Wes Harvey. I'm a local boy, and I'm really not giving up anything. I'm going to try to make all the Lenten student studies and the fish fries at the Catholic Church.
I'm Paula, and I continue to give thanks every day, and also ask for forgiveness for the contract part. Good. My name is Jennifer Murphy. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and we've been here about 9 years. My husband is newly retired, so for Lent, I'm trying not to kill him.
Pray for him too.
For Lent, seriously, for Lent, I'm trying to find where I belong. I had a very
strong church in Massachusetts, and I've yet to find where I belong here, so.
You made it.
So far, so good.
John, you're
More
coming to
praise.
this church.
I'll keep you praying.
I'm Bill Driver. I've been come here since '97 via Pennsylvania and Washington, and I was born in Newark. And
I'm sorry.
good place.
Actually, I'm not.
But for Lent, I'm trying to be more thankful for all the wonderful blessings that I've had throughout my life. And, I am thankful, but I never thank enough. That's what I'm going to do.
My name is Paula Driver. I'm married to him. I've been here longer than him because I had a job and I had to come down here. But what I'm doing for Lent is trying to remember. I saw an interview a couple of weeks ago of Santana. If you don't know who Santana is, he's one of the best guitarists on the planet. And in the interview, he was told, oh, when you were a child, something negative happened to him. And he said, I have more things in this life to celebrate than to mourn. And that's one thing to Lent. Because what he was talking about with the line, we all do that. And I have to remember those celebrations because there's a lot more of those than there are in Lent.
My name is Susan Ott, and I am also a Lutheran. For Lent, two things. So one thing, our priest has called upon us to nurture our soul and to be more mindful of our soul, and that's something I'm trying. I have been very discerning about and reading. My daughter sent me a book, just unannounced, came in the mail about the soul. So, but taking on, Jim and I are very deliberate each morning. We spend time together on the sofa right now, hopefully moving out to the front porch before too much longer. But for our time for reading the Bible and talking about what we've read and our discerning time. We're doing our little thing together.
Jim Ott, Susan and I have been here since full-time 2016, July. We joyfully celebrate with our Episcopal brothers and sisters in Christ. I was honored to be asked to preach here once.
And it was good.
And if Sonny says it was
And
good,
it was
good.
immensely helpful to me as well. So.
About that. And I appreciate very much the partnership that Laura has embraced and has given me a sense of still having something to offer. I'm giving up that time in the morning, which
He's joining me now.
I'm giving up the time to myself when I watch Morning Joe or flip through the channels, checking what others were saying about the beginning of the new day, and have decided I would spend that time with Susan and reading Scripture.
You won't settle that.
It'll be a discussion tomorrow morning.
My name is Sunny A.G. Yes, it's really Sunny on my birth certificate. And Nancy Moser. You don't become a native of your municipality. I've been here, I think, maybe longer than anybody, 50 years, and I'm not a native.
No.
So, and Pat, I lived in Buckingham and went to Mary Washington. Yes. I'm a retired school teacher. My husband was the first county administrator here, and that's why we came. And my Lenten goal is to be a better person, no matter what comes my way.
And it's never too late to begin Lenten discipline during Lent.
Yes, nothing.
But, I thank you all for being here, and I'd like to ask for somebody to pray us out for a safe journey home. Anybody like to do that?
How about Mr. Ott?
I don't know.
She's from New Hampshire, that's just how she talks.
That's my accent.
The Lord be with you.
Thank you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for light in our lives, especially as it comes to us through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord and our Savior, who gave himself for us. And that's what Lent's about, to be reminded of his suffering and his death for our salvation. For this time of brothers and sisters gathering around good food and good thoughts and the hopes of a continued good discussion, remind us that we do those things to better know Jesus as the wounded healer of our lives. So guide us, bless us, thank you for today, give us a good night's rest. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Wes,
Go in peace.
are you the only name